We have breaking news. This is an absolute steal for the New York Islanders as they have signed Jonathan Drouin to a short-term contract that has the potential to be one of the steals of the offseason. We're going to break it down on this episode of Islanders Digest and talk about whether or not this Islanders team may be a playoff team after all the moves they've made on free agency day. Really quickly before we get into that, we noticed that 66% of you who watch these videos have not yet subscribed to the channel. So if you're an Islander fan, you want more Islanders content just like this, what are you waiting for? Be sure to hit subscribe. It's free. Now let's talk about this signing. And I'm going to be honest, when it came to free agency, I was not expecting a lot with the Islanders. I really did expect Tony DeAngelo to sign, especially after they traded Noah Dobson. And check out our previous video talking about Tony DeAngelo, because I think that was a really good value contract. I know on all these videos we're saying these are steals for the Islanders, because honestly, I think every contract Darsh has signed has been really good for the Islanders. And honestly, this is what I expected with Matthew Darsh. One of the big things he focused on when it came to Tampa Bay was making sure they were not spending money on players, wasting money in terms of the salary cap. His main focus was being super effective when it came to signing contracts that provide the most value to the team. And we're seeing that early with the New York Islanders. And this newest signing of Jonathan Drouin is perhaps the best one yet, because the rewards can be huge for the New York Islanders. Drouin will be making $4 million for the next 2 seasons. And this is a player who can play on your first line, and frankly, if he has the right situation, can put up almost a point per game. I'm not saying that is definitely what's going to happen. And look, I was very excited when it came to the Islanders signing Anthony Duclair last season due to injuries and other reasons. That did not work out. We'll see if he bounces back this year. But with Drouin, this is a low-risk contract that can heap a lot of rewards for the New York Islanders. And as a result, I am so excited. And I did not expect this at all, especially when you consider how thin this free agent market was. I'm surprised the Islanders were able to do so well. And I truly think when it came to Jonathan Drouin, I think he might be leaving a little bit of money on the table with this deal to potentially play in a role that he knows will fit him better. Drouin is the type of player, in my opinion, who does not drive his own play, and he's not getting paid to drive his own play. This is a player who needs to play with talent, and I believe playing with Bo Horvat and Mathew Barzal on the Islanders' first line can work wonders for Jonathan Drouin. Let's get right into this contract. 2 years, $4 million. For the type of player Drouin is and the potential he has, this is an absolute steal for the Islanders, especially when you consider free agency and how expensive some of these other names were going to be. I mean, we've talked at points about Nikolai Ehlers, and in reality, he hasn't signed yet. He's probably going to go through all the teams, get like the highest bidder. And when it comes to Ehlers, that's a contract that's going to cost like what, around $8.5 million for a player who has an injury history. Jonathan Drouin, when he's at his best, puts up similar points to Nikolai Ehlers. And to get him for $4 million at 2 years, so basically you're not taking any risk in terms of playing this player as he gets older. He's going to be 31 and 32 for these 2 years, is great for the Islanders. And I think there's really a lot of value when it comes to Jonathan Drouin and what he can provide for the Islanders. Looking at his war chart, there are some deficiencies in his game. For example, the defense is not going to be that strong, but when I think you're putting him on a line with Bo Horvat and Mathew Barzal, this is not really an issue in my opinion. Bo Horvat and Mathew Barzal are both 2 of the better defensive forwards in the game, and they can definitely cover for a player like Jonathan Drouin, who, by the way, while he is not great on defense, at 18%, that is not useless. He definitely can hold his own, but he's not going to be making great defensive plays, and that's where Bo Horvat is really going to step in here and make this really work for the Islanders. But in addition, this is a player who knows how to finish plays. He's a very offensively minded player, and he's someone who can provide a lot of value, especially for that contract. That $4 million is really key here when you talk about this year's free agent class. One player who signed by the Bruins, Tanner Jeannot, is a 4th liner. By all metrics, last season he put up 13 points. He does have one season where he put up 20 goals years ago. But in the past 3 years, this has been a 4th line player, just made $3.4 million for the next 5 years with the Boston Bruins, all right? Think about that for a second when we're considering that the Islanders are only paying Jonathan Drouin $4 million for the next 2 years. Not only did they not have to give up the term that the Bruins gave up for a player like Tanner Jeannot, but the potential for Jonathan Drouin on the Islanders is so much higher than Jeannot on the Bruins. Just looking what he can provide, this is a player who multiple times has had 50-plus point seasons. In fact, last year for the Colorado Avalanche. He put up 56 points in 79 games. Now this season he was injured. He only played 43 games, and I will say with Drouin, injuries are going to be a major concern. It's going to be something the Islanders are going to have to worry about. However, when he was healthy this year for the Colorado Avalanche, he had 37 points in 43 games. He was basically scoring at a point per game clip. If he played the full season, he likely has 20 goals. I understand there are risks with this player in terms of him staying healthy, things like that. But when you consider the Islanders are only signing him for 2 years, this is not a real big deal. I know I was very critical when it came to Nikolai Ehlers and Brock Besser when it came to their injury history. And my big concern there was those two players, if they were going to be on the Islanders, were going to be signing long-term contracts that took them until they were 36 years old. With this, the Islanders are only committing to Jonathan Drouin for 2 seasons. This is a player where if things go well, you can trade him at the deadline next season, if not even this season, and get a big return, although I likely think you are going to want to keep him for the first year of his contract. And if things go well, this is a player who can score a little less than a point per game on your first line. And you look at who's played with Mathew Barzal and Bo Horvat in the past. That's a line, when healthy, that's really struggled to find a third partner to play with. There was some potential with Anthony Duclair, although after what happened last season, I'm assuming most fans do not have a lot of hope that Duclair is going to come back to playing at a first-line pace, especially with what he did last year. Drouin is a perfect player to potentially fill in that role on the first line until a prospect like Victor Eklund finally steps up, because it's going to take some time for Victor Eklund to develop, and we are going to be talking about rookie camp shortly for the Islanders. A lot of exciting things. I'm really excited about a lot of the players there currently. But Jonathan Drouin, while those rookies develop, is a great player to be a stopgap for the New York Islanders. And while people will say he was a Nathan MacKinnon merchant in the fact that he did score a lot more on the Avalanche when playing with MacKinnon, you do have to point out that playing with Barzal and Horvat, while not the same as MacKinnon, you're playing with two very talented players who are going to take the pressure off you. I think he can put up similar numbers, maybe a few points less, but if he's scoring, say he has a 60, 55-point season for the Islanders on the first line, that is going to be a huge win for this team, and it brings me to ask the question, is this Islanders team a playoff team? Earlier in this season, my answer was absolutely not. It just seemed like there were so many issues with this roster. But now looking at this team, while I do think they need a better second line center, I do think there are some concerns when it comes to the top end offense. There's a lot of depth on this Islanders team currently. Now, while I would flip these lines around, I would have Drouin playing instead of Lee on the first line. But still, a Drouin, Horvat, Barzal first line, it does not seem out of place to what other teams in the NHL have. And in previous years, I felt like the Islanders have not had a complete first line. That to me sounds like a complete first line. And then when you're talking about a second line of Lee, Pajot, and Palmieri, that's a line that can provide you, while not as much offense as the second line did last year, I think a third line, and I do think it would be Siplikov and Heineman on the third line with Ritchie. A third line of Siplikov, Heineman, and Ritchie can provide a lot more value, and it gets even more interesting when you think about Holmstrom. It's also almost an Islanders team where you have too many players. You're going to have to figure out where to play everyone, but it's almost at a point where while I don't think the Islanders have that top-end scoring they need, this is a very deep forward core, especially when you're adding Drouin, and it's going to be really interesting to see if this team can compete for the playoffs. No, I don't think this move makes the Islanders instant contenders. I don't think they're going to be one of the top 3 teams in the East, but especially when you're considering that every team in the NHL tried to get better this offseason. As a result, a lot of teams kind of stagnated. I can really see this team taking a step ahead of teams like the Rangers, especially considering the depth on this Islanders lineup, where I feel like this team is a lot more resistant to injuries than previous seasons. And I think a big key for this Islanders season is what Ritchie's going to be able to do as the third line center, because if Ritchie can show that he has some offense and really step up into this role as the season goes along, and potentially even move up to second line center by the end of the year, that I think this Islanders team does have a legitimate chance at making the playoffs, especially when you consider the defense has not really taken a step back. I know the Noah Dobson trade makes it seem like the Islanders are taking a huge step back in defense, but when you look at the lineup and you just actually look at the players, Pelech and Pulock. That is a good defensive pair. Hopefully Pelech and Pulock can both take a step back in the right direction. They seemed to slow down a little bit last year, but I do think Pulock was dealing with some injuries, and I think he can have a bounce-back year. You have Sorokin in net, and we're going to be talking about, they did make a depth signing in goal, and also sign Ethan Bear. We're not going to focus on that in this video, but that's something we're going to mention later tonight. But then you have Romanov D'Angelo. D'Angelo is a player who I really think, in my opinion, is kind of replacing the value that Dobson gave up. Sure, they're going to have some more issues with D'Angelo, but when you include the money they were able to spend on a player like Drouin for what they saved with Dobson, I really think this is a team that might surprise people in terms of how effective they are next season. Even that third pair of Boqvist and Mayfield, while it's not the most pretty pair, these are both players who showed they can play in the NHL, and while people don't love Mayfield has shown he can eat a solid amount of minutes in the NHL, even if it is just 15 minutes a night now, opposed to 20 minutes he used to play. And keep in mind, the left side of the defense, that's not even considering a player like Isaiah George or Schaefer making the lineup. Let me know in the comments what you think about this. Do you think this Jonathan Drouin signing changes the Islanders' chances of making the playoffs? I don't think he's going to be a main factor, but I really do think for the first time looking at this roster that maybe it's not as bad as I thought it was going to be, and there is some optimism. And while I would have liked for the Islanders to contend for a bottom position, I think it's really clear at this point that this is going to be a team that is competitive. Let me know, again, your thoughts in the comments below. As always, if you haven't already, what are you waiting for? Be sure to subscribe to the channel. My name is Patrick Nilan. Catch you on the next episode of Islanders Digest. Let's go, Islanders.